Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys for another episode of our Let's Talk Arsenal series for a kind of a different, more chilled, casual chat with Mr. Ben Jacobs. How you doing, mate? You good? You well?
I'm good. We've got 3 weeks to go before I can get some sleep when the window slams shut, as the cliche phrase that's always used is. And then, hey, we will move on to January. But I'm great, thank you.
Are you looking forward to it closing? Because I love transfers. Don't get me wrong. It's one of the busiest times of the year for us, and chatting about them is always interesting and intriguing and great to do. But there is almost a sense of relief when it does slam shut.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's many journalists out there, myself included, that love covering the window because it's so chaotic and unpredictable, and deals can happen at 5 a.m. or midnight. And by the same token, they move so fast that just because you got an update at 9 a.m. doesn't mean that it's the same at 10 a.m. So you're constantly on edge. There's a huge appetite and demand to cover everything. And there's always that irony, particularly that you see through social media, where you post something and the transfer maybe hasn't changed dramatically as you would expect, because this isn't Championship Manager or Football Manager. Even a fast transfer can still take some time. Clubs are often working windows ahead. So there's an expectation from the fan base when a name is leaked or reported that it might be done today, tomorrow, the next day. And there's a real push for any bit of news that you can cling to make your day. And I get it, because that's what a fan wants. And that's not just the transfer. It's all the little details, the fee, the length of contract, when is the player going to be announced, and so on. But the paradox lies in the fact that fan bases and social media are split. So every time you post something, you get 50% asking for more and 50% saying, I'm tired of this. And at the same time as one person tells you, I'd love an update on this, you get another person saying, I'm sick and tired of this. Why are you still updating on this? And as a broadcaster, one of the biggest challenges is that 90% of what I do, regardless of what you see on social media, is broadcasting. And at CBS, we're based in America, and we have a version effectively of Sky Sports News. So you're talking in the moment and you can be accurate at the time, but you don't always write that 1,000 words on a .com website, because I'm not an out print journalist. Sometimes I do. So what you say is always very live, in inverted commas. And then, of course, has the whole audience seen the broadcast or just the tweet? Have they seen what you've published, or have they only seen a snippet from a fan aggregator? Have you been quoted in context or out of context? And these are some of the challenges that make the window quite stressful and non-enjoyable for, I would say, but I can only speak for myself, but I have friends clearly in the industry too. The vast majority of journalists, we all find this a exciting time, but equally quite a frustrating.
Frustrating is the word. Yeah, definitely that comes into the realm of how I would describe kind of coverage. I think and to give kind of people listening a context as to why me and Ben are having this chat. I mean, we were chatting the other day over WhatsApp, talking kind of about a separate story, as I was kind of double and triple checking sources on something I wanted to report. And we ended up having a chat about kind of some of the darker sides of things and the abuse that both of us have, suffered across covering transfers. And I thought it'd be a good idea to kind of be more open about it, because I think people watching, people reading, people who follow both of us, I know I talk about it a lot. I'm very open about kind of the social side to it, but maybe someone like yourself, Ben, and certainly plenty of our colleagues in the industry as well, don't open up and talk about it. I remember reading a piece from Sam Lee, who writes for The Athletic. I think he's their Manchester City correspondent. And he did an entire piece about reporting on the transfer window from a social aspect. It's very good. I encourage anyone to go and give that a read. But first of all, to kind of set the scene, why journalism, Ben? What drew you into this chaotic zoo that we live in now?
The pay, obviously.
He's honest. You gotta respect it.
I mean, I grew up listening to radio broadcasts in particular, and I always wanted to be a football commentator, and I love the performance aspect. And radio is a lot of fun, to be honest with you, because you're the eyes and the ears, whereas in television, a broadcaster can sometimes speak too much, and because you've got the visuals, you don't need them to hold your hand as much. But in radio, you can get really animated, and if the team is doing well, you're that whole energy to somebody listening. And if you're excited and shouting and screaming and making a performance of it, then you're bringing that to life to somebody that isn't there. and it's your responsibility in radio to paint absolutely everything. So I grew up listening to my team Leicester on the radio. I got into journalism by making tea and doing work experience at my local radio station. Then I got sent out to report on non-league football just on the phone. And that made me think, this will be fun. I want to be a broadcaster and a football commentator. So from there, I went to Oxford.
How many years ago was that? Are we talking, just for context?
12 years ago.
12 years ago.
And then we are then moving into university. And that part was sort of interesting for me, because when I started at university, that's the 12-year part, by the way, rather than the 16-year-old me making tea. And at that stage, there wasn't many top broadcast courses around, and media studies was seen as a bit hit and miss. Now it's brilliant because they're run by the BBC and ITV. You get training, you learn how to use a camera to edit, you can walk away with a show reel. So if anyone's aspiring to be a journalist, I have nothing but praise. But back then, everyone in the industry and the generation above me in their mid-30s to mid-40s were saying the same thing, that go and get an arts degree in English or in history. So I went to university. I studied English at Oxford at the same time because of my work experience, which is why it was so important when I was younger. I was able to get a recommendation to go to the Oxford radio station. And then from there, I really got quite lucky, because Oxford and Reading, for some reason, used to operate out of the same studios at the BBC. And Oxford were the big team back then, and Reading were not. And then slowly Reading supplanted Oxford. They ended up in the Premier League. So there was an opportunity to cover Reading as they rose and then ended up in the Premier League. And that was quite useful to get on the CV as well. And really all I ever wanted to do was go to games, interview managers, commentate, talk, as everybody listening and has been on previous shows can attest as well. I like to talk. So that is why that is why I got into journalism. It's fun for me being on site. It's exciting having that performance aspect. And even now I do reporting, I do commentary. So historically on my CV, I did La Liga and Ligue 1 commentary for beIN Sports, WSL, long-standing relationship with them, away from football, Olympic Games, and then host broadcasters and what's called world feeds, which is all of the commentary that often comes on site or from studios that isn't in England, but gets pumped around the world to all other broadcasters. And then eventually now I've ended up at CBS, and it's a lot of fun, the performance aspect. But in that time, journalism has changed, and there's become an emphasis on immediacy and on multi-platform. So you can't just now broadcast or commentate, which is my trade, if you like. You have to be able to use social media. Ideally, it's very beneficial if you can write something up with proficiency for a .com. And at the same time, you should always be able to develop other skills that I certainly never had when I was at university, like editing or using a camera, because then you have the ability to provide a all-in-one product which can be cost effective to your employer. And if it's cost effective to your employer, you've got far more chance of going all around the world covering things, because you don't always have to be trailed by a producer, a cameraman, .com writer. You can say, hey, if you want to send me off to interview Mikel Arteta, I can film it, I can do the interview, I can produce it, and I can supervise the edit. And that aspect of journalism is what's changed from when I first started, where if you were a broadcaster, you were very much a talking head. So as I moved through in the early part of my career, I was just being given scripts. Read this purely for the voice. Doesn't matter if you've got any understanding. The stresses on where to emphasize were there. The pronunciations were in brackets. You got handed a bit of paper. You sat in front of a mic. You read a news bulletin. Job done. And now it couldn't be more different.
It really, really couldn't. I mean, the phrase of jack of all trades, master of none, it's changed dramatically, because now not only do you have to be a master of, like, it's not a case of being, a jack of all trades, master of none. It's a case of having to be a master of as many trades as feasibly possible. If you can speak, if you can write, if you can work a camera, as you said, if you can edit, if you can be a graphic designer, all of this works in hand. And especially as everything's got a lot more visual, and fan media in particular has grown, massively. It's caught up and in some cases overtaken. I mean, you think about YouTube shows and how many times a live broadcast can start to overtake the numbers being put out by the actual broadcasters out there for certain shows. It's mental how it's taken over. So having that ability to be versatile, to have your initiative, is definitely something that has had to be learned by new and existing people in the business. But you've got into more recently, talking specifically about transfers. We first met and first spoke last year. I think you were at the Tokyo Games. That was when we first spoke. And the reason why I reached out to you was to try and get some information and some insight around a potential Qatari takeover of Arsenal, which was being kind of scouted out and talked about at the time, which of course never ended up happening. And lo and behold, in the piece that we did together, you said it was very unlikely that would take place. And indeed, it never did. Not only did Arsenal never want to sell, but the Qatari interest never seemed to kind of materialize anyway. But what now has changed since then is obviously you very much got into football transfer reporting to another complete level than what was already existing. And when we first spoke, I joked with you off air that, you were just under, I think it was on just under 20,000 followers on Twitter, and being involved in the kind of football sphere, that has grown 6 times as much now. And with that, whilst there is obviously the notoriety and people go to you for news and that status is there, what also comes with it is the darker side, which we're here to talk about today, which is the abuse, the expectation, the frustration that goes with a lack of reward sometimes for what you can perceive to be a lot of hard work that goes into getting information, getting a good scoop, and not necessarily getting the feedback that you were hoping for. So trying to start this conversation, were you aware of kind of the can of worms that would open by going into transfers as much as you have?
I think so, only because takeovers, which was my area of speciality historically, have always had the same kind of feedback. So sometimes you get a whole new demographic, like Arsenal fans coming to you, and it's the first time that they've seen my work. And that might be because people are outside of America or are following me on social media for the first time. But then if you talk to Newcastle fans, they've known all about me for the last 2.5 years, including the 18-month saga that was their takeover. And I got a ton of abuse over that because every time I explained the roadblock from the Saudi Public Investment Fund taking over, I got told I was a Qatari stooge. I got personal abuse. I got people attacking me in DMs. And it was exactly the same when Leeds got taken over by GFH, and even all the way back to Arsenal's affiliation with Emirates and Manchester City's Middle Eastern takeover. So when you talk to Manchester City fans or Leeds fans or Newcastle fans, they've known me for a decade. But other fan bases like Arsenal, PSG is another good example. They're perhaps learning of me through social media for the first time if they're outside of America. And the growth hasn't gone from necessarily 20,000 to 100,000 or more. It's probably more morphed from 60,000 to 100,000, which is a big leap. But it's not only the number, it's the fact that when you cover transfers, your followers, at least a few hundred of them, are fan aggregators. So therefore, the 100,000 you have are not necessarily the ones that are abusing you. Some are. I think some people just like the idea of following so they can tell you that you were wrong about something or fire personal abuse at you.
Why do you think they do that? What do you think is the motive?
I mean, there's a variety of different reasons. One is the fact that they're just young and faceless and trolls, and this is social media. 2 is that every transfer becomes a badge of honor. So if Arsenal are competing against Tottenham for a player, then the journalist that says the player's going to sign for Arsenal is opening themselves up to abuse from Tottenham. I'm seeing this at the moment with De Jong. I've said very clearly in my reporting that De Jong wants to stay at Barcelona, which is a line everyone likes to ignore. Then I've added that if he's forced out, keyword forced, then the preference is Chelsea over Manchester United. And then, of course, the fan aggregators may just report Frankie de Jong has a preference of Chelsea over Manchester United. Yeah. And then 500,000 Manchester United followers that are always looking at the aggregator account, but do not follow me, see that one line. They don't read the thread. They don't hear the broadcast. They see the out of context conclusion that they think I've made out of context, and then they attack you. And that's partly a badge of honor for the club. It's partly a gleeful, I think, desire of certain users on social media to undermine journalists because it's too easy on social media without verification, without a profile picture, without a name, without an email, without consequence, to just band around swear words or fraud or liar. And this is, I think, just a way of nullifying reporting. And in the same way that bots are used for messaging, and that can be to amplify or undermine, and it is tactical, and we see that particularly in politics. Football is the inverse of that. It's not bots saying Manchester United are doing a great job, Arsenal have had a tremendous window. Not yet anyway. We might get there one day, but let's hope not. But it's just actual people. It's fans blindly defending their club. And I could put out there that Arsenal are about to sign Ronaldo and Messi in the next 5 minutes, and Arsenal fans will just go, wow, exciting. He's good. He's tier one. That's good news, even though it's farcical. And then similarly, Barcelona fans that think they're getting Messi in a year's time, PSG fans, Manchester United fans will immediately say, liar, fraud, and bookmark this. I'm coming back to you. So it's almost a head-to-head that is born out of the anonymity of social media and pre-existing club rivalries. That's what I think is causing it. And journalists, naturally, as reporters, are essentially the messengers. And we get sort of shot, in inverted commas, in the process. And what I think I would add, which is strange, is that nobody ever calls their manager or their sporting director a fraud, even when in retrospect what they've said has been contradicted by reality, because that's just gamesmanship or that's just accurate at the time. So with Arsenal, when Edu comes out and says, oh yeah, we never seriously bid for Rafinha because we always knew that he was going to Barcelona, and Deco told me that all along. It couldn't be further from the truth. Arsenal started with Rafinha before Chelsea, when Barcelona had an agreement with the player but hadn't moved. They tried with 3 different bids, verbal or formal. Then Chelsea entered the race. At that point, not just me, many journalists that have spoken to direct Arsenal sources, we never name them, but direct senior people at Arsenal, have all told the same story independently, that Edu was in a panic. He couldn't get hold of Deco. He had no idea what was going on when Chelsea bid. And now in retrospect, of course, he comes out and just says, we were never that interested. He was always going to Barcelona. That's why we didn't advance it. Brendan Rodgers says Wesley Fofana is not for sale, or did 2 weeks ago. Today says we don't really want to sell Fofana. And then if Fofana goes, nobody's going to come back to Edu or Rodgers and say, liar, fraud. But somehow it's acceptable with a journalist, even though we're giving you that same blow by blow. So if on day 1, Arsenal are confident in Rafinha, if on day 5, Arsenal have placed their first bid, if on day 10, Arsenal are assessing whether to bid again because Chelsea have entered the race, and then on day 20, he joins Barcelona via a Chelsea accepted offer, in that story, I'm not inaccurate giving it to you, but because it's just there in a soundbite or in a tweet, and I never delete them because they're accurate and they're part of the narrative. But if they're there, people will retweet them, they'll pull them back up, and in a really simplistic way, they'll attack you because they believe that you are, in inverted commas, wrong, but you're actually correct. So you can either follow the window in a blow by blow and then accept that the transfer window itself has twists and turns and is unreliable. It's not the journalist, it's the window itself that is unreliable. Or you can get a good night's sleep and wait for your club to officially announce who they do and don't sign. And then you will get a lot less excitement, but equally a whole lot less frustration. And I just think it's up to the individual. But somehow people are angry needlessly, and it's almost like if Arsenal fail, it's my fault. If Arsenal try for a target and then U-turn, I have misled the fan base. I have created false hype and hope, and it was never realistic. When most journalists are just endeavoring to find balance, find sources, and tell you how it is in the moment. And if it happens, we'll have reported on it. And if it doesn't happen, we'll tell you the reasons why. But under every circumstance, there is constantly somebody that chooses to attack journalists, whether that's personally or professionally. And that's why a lot of us don't really enjoy the window.
Yeah, I mean, I remember speaking to Charles Watts. We did a Let's Talk Arsenal fan show, and he said he hates it. Like, hates the window, can't stand it. But it's interesting because I've spoken to a number of journalists, of course, who cover Arsenal specifically, and one of the big things that they say is that they don't block people. I am a serial blocker, and I'm quite proud of it. This channel's got a ridiculous number of accounts that are blocked. It's got, and my Twitter account does as well. It's not that I get a kick out of it. I just rather, from my perspective, I just feel like there's especially with when you kind of own a community like this, you've built that community, and there's a responsibility that goes with it. You're responsible, in my view, for creating a positive environment for people to be in, and that people want to come in and put an opinion across into a chat box and know that they can get that opinion respected, whether that's agreed with by me or disagreed by me. They can have that opinion respected if it's put across in a respectful way. That's the environment. So I suppose to give context to what you were saying there from my perspective, I remember, just today, a piece about Lusambi Lokonga coming out, information that I got from someone I know is very close to his family and his representatives, that his intention is to stay at Arsenal, that he doesn't have any intention to move anywhere. And so that story has been reported. That, however, doesn't mean that in 2 weeks' time, something dramatically changes. And Mikel Arteta has a word and said, I don't think you're going to get as many minutes as potentially we were hoping to give you, because we're bringing in, who knows, Yuri Tielemans or something like that. We'll get on to him later. And then he may go on loan. And as you were referencing, because of the way Twitter is, which is an effective kind of history book of everything you've ever published, people can go back to those tweets, to those stories, and say, you said he was staying. You said he wasn't going anywhere. You said... And as you were saying there just a second ago, these are the situations as and when we know them in that moment. But football is so chaotic and, unstable that things change so quickly. And often, we are not going to know in that very moment when the thing changes. We'll find out when a source tells us. We'll find out when someone was willing to release that information to us. And that's kind of the thing that creates, I think, as you were talking about a second ago, that retrospective abuse that comes from looking back at old tweets. Are you a blocker? Are you like me, or do you subscribe to the more Charles Watts way of thinking of going, no, mute, ignore, move on?
I mean, honestly, you get so many notifications, thousands in the space of even a minute, that you don't have the opportunity to read everything. I don't really block, because you have to some extent, move on and accept when you report that you have trust in your own information. So reading every single comment, searching all of the ats with your name that may result in a block is not necessarily the healthiest thing that you can do. And I try and have fun with it to some extent, because some Joe 9946 AFC, who's
someone's Googling that right now,
in their bedroom with a profile picture of Bart Simpson in a Arsenal cap and then a header of Mikel Arteta, is not going to stop me from doing my job, whatever they call me. The challenge is in when the abuse becomes so personal, persistent, or crosses a line. So during a transfer window, you largely get called a liar and a fraud. But what I feel for is footballers and anybody in or outside the industry that is getting racial abuse or hatred or death threats. And there's been one or two, by the way, where somebody will be so strong with their wording that you feel you have to report it. But in doing so, usually you get an email back saying that it was fully within Twitter's guidelines. And to give you an example of the level of it, and I don't know what I'm going to see, by the way, but I've got my Twitter open at the moment. And since we've been speaking, so I haven't checked it, but I clicked on it right at the beginning of the show just so I could get a number on it. And we're 24 minutes in now. And currently the number at the top of the tab, which tells you how many unclicked notifications you've got, is on 9,870.
That's ridiculous.
And that is
mad.
24 minutes. And a lot of that is just likes and retweets, but then feel for, say, Fabrizio. Then let me open up the inbox. And this is what I mean. So now, in the last 24 minutes, I have 197 new messages. And if I just browse through them, I have absolutely disgraceful what you just said about Liverpool. 0 updates, no new information. Ben, can you tell me what the Chelsea Spurs score is going to be? Fuck off, twat. Yo, my man. I want to work with you, sir. I am from Nigeria. Hey, bro, fuck off. Find another job. Why aren't you getting back to me? Follow back. Can you follow me? I had a bet with my friend that said, if you follow me, he'll give me 50 quid. Go find another job. Fuck you, you. I'm not even going to say that word. It's the word. And this is the pattern you get. Now, that is only in the last 24 minutes. So naturally, throughout the course of the day, you're getting a high volume solely based upon reporting on transfers and not saying anything particularly contentious around them. You're just trying to give the facts and the information, but someone doesn't want Fofana to go. Someone doesn't like something that I reported on Liverpool being content with their window. Someone doesn't like the latest, what they perceive to be non-Tielemans update. Now, you get a lot of positives as well. There's a variety of people each day that write and say, you're one of the best. I really enjoy your work. But there is a constant in inbox and in ats stream of abuse. And for any journalist, it's not fair because we are there trying to give you the information to the best of our knowledge. We're not some made up in the know. We're not plucking a story out of thin air. We're trying to go to all sides. Our information is usually consistent and 99 times out of 100 in keeping with what the wide media spectrum is also reporting. Where we can add exclusives, we do. Where we can develop a narrative, we try. When we can be first to a target or a name or a transfer, we are. And Arsenal fans constantly come to me and they'll say, well, what have you done this window? And I say, first of all, what is the expectation when every club is signing between, say, 3 and 7 players? What is your expectation from a journalist during the window? Because the last I checked, I was the first journalist to tie Arsenal to Tielemans, and I've been accurately across that story. I don't think that I was wrong on the Rafinha front. I'm right at the moment to say that Arsenal are focusing on outgoings before they move in the market. The interest, but I never said bid, in Paqueta was fully legitimate. And then with Martinez, I was reporting on that long before Manchester United bid. And Arsenal were always very confident in the player. In fact, they made 3 bids before Manchester United even entered the race. So you can hardly say that reporting that before United even moved is inaccurate. And the other thing is that I was first on a broadcast because I got it at the time of broadcast to the verbal terms with Gabriel Jesus. And when I put that out there, because Fabrizio and so on hadn't reported it, the amount of abuse I got for that, fraud, liar. A day later, a lot of other accounts said there's a verbal deal in place. And then suddenly you're proven right. No one will come back and apologize. So it's sort of how, I don't know if you find the same, but if I report
it's no rewards. Yeah.
If I report something first, I'm a liar, even if it's correct. And if I report something second, I'm somehow tapping in somebody else's news. So you cannot win in that respect.
Indeed. I mean, whilst we're at this point, it's probably worth pointing out that along with the abuse, there is still a lot of positives. And Ben, you're getting a lot of positive feedback in the chat box. And thank you, everybody, for doing that. There was a great comment. I thought I saved it, but I don't think I did. That says they used to watch you years ago on I think it was some foreign website that you used to work for. That shows you kind of how far back people have been following your work. So it's great to see that in the chat box as well. Absolutely. So there you go. But there is a lot of positivity as well, which is always important to focus on. That's what I try and ultimately focus on always is the positive comments as much as I can. But yeah, just to hear kind of back what you were saying, to read through that Twitter feed. Is I can't fathom that, because even though, you know, I get my fair share of abuse, you know, the level is just of a different frequency. It's just not the same. And I think that from my perspective, I can keep up with it, so I can block, you know, the accounts, whereas that, you know, is just unmanageable. And that kind of brings us on nicely to the next part, which is what can be done and kind of your opinion on what should be being done, because social media has obviously faced plenty of backlash, and those who run Twitter and Facebook and all these other accounts, should more be being done? And on this channel, we've had a number of debates about what strategies could be put in place. And to be honest, no matter what strategy you come up with, there's always a very viable devil's advocate to those strategies. There's always another way to look at it. One of them has always been about registration. You know, should your account be tied to you, so that if you say something racist, homophobic, derogatory, you know, etc., that you can be tied to it, and therefore relevant sanctions can be put against you personally. Then the obvious counter to that is that, you know, having personal information like that publicly on a public domain can be very risky if it's accessed illegally. So how do you feel about strategies that could be put in place to kind of manage this stuff?
Well, let's not forget it's called social media. So we have a decision to make really as an industry, because if the abuse continues or grows and gets worse and the social media platforms don't act, then one solution is to take the news off the platforms and for journalism to say, sorry, we're not prepared to lead with digital-led content, even if it creates clicks, because social media is too toxic for that. And what we say on it gets taken out of context, so it becomes disinformation even though you intended it to be authentic. And that's why I put it in a thread, because everything is there. And as a broadcaster, not everyone is going to see this show or a broadcast on CBS, but a thread gives you the context. So then if somebody takes something as a one-liner, I've got the full context there on my feed. So one option is that you see journalists move away from revealing information. And I think that has definitely been the case with the transfer window, that it either goes through a company account rather than a personal account, or there's just a lot of journalists out there with information that don't want to do transfer windows. I think about my colleague, James Benge, who has phenomenal Arsenal contacts and has covered many a window. But because of our strategy at CBS, we don't have to cover the window. We can strive for news, but our priority is to promote our CBS
content.
Right. And that's Serie A and Champions League. So James Benge could today decide he wants to go 24/7 on the transfer window and be phenomenal, but he doesn't. And one of the reasons for that is because, I mean, I'm not going to put words in his mouth, but I know James, and I feel one of the reasons for that is because he's sick and tired of the constant backlash, the hours that you have to put in, the phone calls that you have to make, and the abuse that you receive. So I think the solution is in social media lowering its bar for what gets punished. That's the first thing to say. So if you perpetually abuse somebody, whether that wording is vile, homophobic, racist, or just constantly telling someone over and over and over again they're a fraud, they're a liar, then there should be grounds, because if it's repeated and it was in person, then it would be punished. If you come up to me every single day, tap me on the shoulder, say fraud to my face in a coffee store, walk away, do it the next day, do it the third day, eventually you'll get fined and prosecuted for stalking. But online, it's fine. And there has to be more of a correlation to bring the punishments and the consequences of reality into social spheres, even if the wording being used is not always severe. And I think that's the big frustration, that because it's transfers and football, and unless it is homophobic and racist, if it's just a journalist being called a liar and it's in a DM, the social platforms don't do anything because there's no consequence. They can't suspend someone for using the word liar or fraud, even if it's repeated, even if it's every day, even if some would say it's defamatory. And that's the challenge. And then, of course, there's such a high volume now of users and people doing this abuse that clamping down on all of it requires money and energy and maybe even a reformatting of how the platform actually works. So I think, in essence, the solution is to educate, to clamp down more severely by suspending accounts, to stop people creating faceless accounts. There should be absolutely no reason why, when you join Twitter, much like some other platforms, you don't have to verify using a phone number and an email. And then when a complaint is made, you can be tracked down a lot easier. Because if I actually go through the abuse in my inbox, I would say that at least 70% of it is not coming from somebody with a name like Tom Canton. It's coming from AFC1234. It's coming from an account that has been specifically created to troll. So then if there's any negative feedback, it's a burner account. And that's the part that social media needs to stop. And if they don't, then there is an argument that we need to take authentic news away from social media. And that is almost not a punishment, it's a relief from the perspective of the industry. And even though, as I say, it generates clicks and it's good for commercial, it cannot be continuing that every, as I said before, 24 minutes, there's at least 15 messages of abuse in my inbox.
I was just reading as well, trying to get up the, I remember as you were speaking there, an article that I read about Ian Wright, who suffered with racial abuse, of course, and talks about it very openly. And it's a report from 2021. People may remember this story. But he was racially abused by an 18-year-old who the whole case went to court, and the 18-year-old pleaded guilty to harassing Mr. Wright on the 11th of May, contrary to the Non-Fatal Offences Act Against the Person Act in 1997, and sending a message by phone that was grossly offensive, obscene and menacing. And at a sentencing hearing at Tralee District Court on Wednesday, Judge David Waters said he didn't see anything to be gained by imposing a criminal conviction and handed O'Brien probation. And it's that kind of lack of consequence, the lack of deterrent that is just non-existent on social media, that means that, you know, this will continue. People in the chat box sometimes go, why do you talk about this? Why do you? And to me, you know, the only way in which that it can be tackled is by making people more aware. And if one person listens to this goes, you know what, actually, I've been a bit of an idiot and I've said a few horrible things and I'm not going to do that anymore because now I can see the difference, then I'll count that as a win. You know, just one person changing their mind is good enough for me. And I think that's the importance of it. To kind of bring it back round, because I'm only going to go on for another 10 minutes or so, is the current state of the transfer and how you've dealt with kind of the Tielemans stuff, because that's obviously where you've heavily been involved from an Arsenal perspective, is on the Yuri Tielemans line. The current state of play, as we know, is that obviously Arsenal haven't made an official bid. Whilst we know that Arsenal are very much in tune with the player and there's an agreement from the player side he's willing to come, how have you found covering that story? And of course, as someone who's been very close to that line of questioning and line of negotiation, has there been any feeling of reward for yourself in covering that? Because I sense that the answer is probably next to nothing, but you might be telling me I'm wrong.
Well, it's like we said at the very beginning, every single day I might get 100 messages saying Tielemans update, whilst at the same time being told, why are you updating on Tielemans? Nothing is moving. Arsenal are still in for Tielemans. He is a possibility depending on the outgoings. The situation hasn't moved. So if in a live broadcast, which often finds its way onto social media, I'm asked about it, I'm not going to reply, sorry, I don't want to talk about it, because every time I talk about it, whether it's moved a bit or hasn't moved at all, I get criticism because it's the same thing being reported. I'm going to tell you the latest, and transfers don't always move. So I think the reward for any transfer is in following it from its start to its finish, whatever happens. And that is ultimately my job to some extent during the transfer window. And those who have followed this show and my work back in January will be aware that, I think anyway, I never like to big it up or shout and scream about stories, because I'm not a believer that the journalist should be the center of attention. The story follows its own path. So whether you've got something exclusive or not, I don't slap bells around it, write the word exclusive in capitals. I just report to the best of my knowledge, predominantly in broadcast, but a lot of people will know me via what I put on Twitter. So I think, to the best of my knowledge, that I was the first to Tielemans, and naturally I have good contacts on the Leicester side as well. And having followed that through, it's changed since January, because in January Arsenal were flying towards Champions League football, and the Tielemans deal was looking very, very likely. At the beginning of the window, it was still quite likely. And now Arsenal are looking at lots of different players, of which Tielemans is still one of them. It's never gone dead. And that is the update. And I have said many, many times that if Arsenal move, they will get Tielemans, providing they don't mess him around or he doesn't feel unwanted, which is kind of the case with Chelsea's pursuits of Jules Koundé, where they almost signed him, sanctions, didn't sign him, lined him up again, moved on to other targets, came back, he joined Barcelona. And that can happen because if you're Yuri Tielemans, you have to be invested in Arsenal. And if they mess you around at any point, I'm not saying they have, but if it transpires that Arsenal say, wait, hang on, maybe we'll sign you, we'll come back to you, it's not dead yet, hold on, we might bid, we might not, actually we're going to wait until January or next summer. At that point, Tielemans may go, another club's come along and they really, really want me and they've offered me a clear pitch. So this is how the window changes. But the reality of the Tielemans situation is that it's been slow. So as a journalist, if I'm asked about it, that's exactly what I'll say. And if that's construed as a repeat update, then there's nothing more I can do if I want to stay accurate as per sources on all sides. And this is the difference between a journalist and a so-called in the know. And I'm not talking, by the way, about false in the knows that make things up. I'm talking about an unfortunate middle ground classification of someone that might have a bit of genuine information because they know one side or one person, and fans in particular, where they have contacts at their club, but not the other club or not directly with the player. They can fall into this category. So a journalist is trying to go to all sides to get reality. And if there's conflicting information, we either have to report that or we have to come down on a balance based on the information provided to us. A genuine in the know that might know one person may only have gone to the agent or to the player or to someone at Arsenal Football Club. And that bit of information may have context to it, but it might not, which is why they're right some of the time and they're wrong some of the time. And then there's a whole different area of the window where fees are disputed tactically, because why do you want to tell someone you've spent 70 to 75 million on a Rafinha when then the next person that does business with you will be like, oh, you're not that broke then, Barcelona. We'll have 70 million for Bernardo Silva. So you say it was a 50 million deal and then it's tactical. And similarly, Leeds United will say, as they've done now on record, exactly the opposite with that deal, that it was a really high fee, the same as Chelsea's. Why? Because when they do business, they want to make out like it has to be at their price. And this is part of the confusion as a journalist and why you go to both sides. So an in the know clouds the situation with, say, a Tielemans, because they may have one bit of the puzzle. And I'm in no way calling out any individuals or saying that any bit of information is wrong. But an in the know will often come to a journalist with that bit of information. And then when I verify it with 3 or 4 sources, I realize that it's either incorrect or it's tactical or it's changed or it's out of date. And this is probably the main message to put across, that responsible journalism is not about giving you a black and white, a yes or no, even though that's what fans want. It's not about giving you a short answer. It's about telling you the reality as we understand it in the moment. So if from Twitter you're frustrated and you just want, well, are we going to sign them or not? 99 times out of 100 in a window until a deal is at least 95% done, that answer will not be there with that level of definitiveness. So those that want that can take that and can hero anyone that gives them that. And of course, because it's always a coin toss, will they sign them or won't they sign them? If you keep doing that, you'll be right some of the time and you'll be wrong some of the time. But again, as a journalist, we're not coming to a story trying to grab a bit of the puzzle and then jump ahead. I know that there's an element of clickbait to some outlets, and tabloid journalism is perhaps more intent on headlining, but you'll still see them U-turn on that headline. So then if you Google the same outlet, they'll be forced to give you one sensational headline saying it's a yes, and then another saying that there's been a twist and it's a no. But broadcasters are trying to just give you context. And if that means we're wafflers, if that means we're sitting on the fence, then so be it. Don't follow us. Don't listen to the coverage. But that, for me, is responsible journalism. A short yes or a no before it is a yes or no is not responsible journalism.
I think the important thing to take away is talking about how you absorb the information, you know, and as you've just discussed there around what's discussed and how you, if you really are desperate, you know, to find out every day an update on a specific player, I think you have to come to the reality that that's just not going to happen. And I know that every day you get tweets, and every day I'll get comments in this chat book saying, what's the latest on this guy, latest on this guy. The reality is that whilst things can change very quickly in football, things rarely change in these things day to day. And so there rarely is a daily update on that specific line. We can keep giving you the latest and keep giving you what the situation is, but you know, most of the time it's not really changing day by day. But Ben, I'm glad. I feel like you've managed to get a lot off your chest in a way in today's show as well, which is great. And thank you for being so honest and open about some of the things that you've experienced and gone through. It really does help people with understanding this and being that as well. You've got a lot of love and comments on the chat box as well, hopefully contrasting to some of the usual comments that you've got on your social media, as we've heard from today. But for people that don't know, tell people where they can find you and, of course, what you're going to be up to.
Yeah, at Jacobs Ben is the personal handle. CBS Sports Golasso, it's in brackets on the screen, is the company handles. We've got a lot coming up on CBS. We've got some exclusive interviews from Arsenal in the next couple of weeks on the women's side, because the WSL have got their media days, the WSL rights holders. So look out for Viv Miedemar and others. That's going to be really exciting to be a part of that launch. We've got Champions League and Serie A and Europa League too. So I'll be following a little bit of Arsenal in Europe as well throughout the course of the season on social media and on CBS Sports HQ. So stay posted. Lots going on. Lots of leagues now underway, including the Premier League, which means it will be busy times after the window shuts. And let's hope that Arsenal have a good end to the window and continue their winning start to the season.
We can only hope, and hopefully you're covering Arsenal in the Champions League next season is going to be the hope indeed. We'll finish on this super chat from Chris P, who just simply says, I love you both very much indeed. So I think that's a nice way
Thank you.
To end the show. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. Drop a like on the video. YouTube got rid of the dislike button, so you can't press that anymore. Or if you can, I don't think I ever get told that it's there, which is their way of trying to tackle some kind of abuse. I say just don't have a dislike button. It's probably easier. Thank you so much, guys, for listening. Drop a like, subscribe if you're new, and as always, up the Arsenal.